From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. The staff of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State will take up some new numbers from the Kansas Farm Management Association on cow herd profitability and will relate those to tangible cost management measures, such as grazing the herd on crop stover. Also today, out of the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State, Cassie Wandersee will talk with two Kansas Christmas tree farmers, Phil Wegman and Amy Grelinger. They'll discuss what it takes to succeed in the Christmas tree business and how those operations are adjusting to accommodate customers under current circumstances. Also, awaiting with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. All that here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today, and welcome once more. Well, first up on this edition for you cow-calf operators, a cross-section of herd management topics that all funnel down into profit performance. The team at the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State had some new information out of the Kansas Farm Management Association to work with in this discussion. And contributing here, K-State veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, along with cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber and livestock economist Dustin Pendell.
Dustin, you guys have done a great job the last few years in summarizing the economics of cow-calf herds in Kansas, and you break them into thirds. So based on the profitability, you look at the high, middle, and lower third of cow-calf herds. And I know last week you put out a chart on Twitter that you have put together from these last numbers, which came from 2019. Tell us a little bit about that chart.
Last week when we talked, we had there was a chart. Basically, it's for 45 years worth of net returns over variable costs across those 45 years. If you look at it, there was about most all those years, but about 6 or 7 of them had a loss.
And that was for all producers. That was everybody.
All producers in the Kansas Farm Management Association that report their cow-calf enterprise level data. And so the idea is just to show you kind of what's happened across time. The thing that we tweeted out today, and looking at it's titled the Kansas Farm Management Association Beef Cattle Enterprise Returns Over Variable Costs, just looking at the last 5 years. And so what that was doing was, instead of just reporting all the farms together like we did last week in that chart, we ranked these operations. I believe there were 77 operations. We ranked them from the highest profit to the lowest profit. And then we just divide them into thirds. And then we can kind of compare maybe the top third, your high profit producers, to your lowest third. And we could see, the idea is to see if there's anything that stands out. You know, what are they doing different? Maybe have lower expenses in certain categories. And so thinking it from a management standpoint is what I guess we're trying to get at here, is just to see, is there anything that we can tease out that might help some of those producers that are maybe in that middle to lower third that are looking to try to move up into the higher profit categories.
I found that chart really interesting, Dustin, because as I look down, because you got some things on the income side, such as number of calves sold per cow exposed, the weight of calves sold, and the price that was received for calves. And there were some differences among those 3 categories. And then you had a section kind of on the expenses, the feed expenses, pasture rent, those other things. And when I looked at all of those things, what I saw the difference between the upper third and the middle and the lower third was no home runs difference, but just a little bit better in almost every category. There wasn't really a home run. It's like, oh, well, the top third, they do X really well. Like they have really low feed costs, or they have really high reproductive efficiency or something. It's like, yeah, they were a little better in a lot of categories.
Yeah. That said, though, Larson, the difference between feed costs between the high third, low third profitability groups is about $150 a cow.
That does explain a lot of it.
That's almost half of the profit difference between the low third and the top third.
So
a big chunk of it's feed cost, managing feed costs. Pasture cost was almost identical, but feed cost was big difference.
So I think feed costs, and I'll throw in, when you look at the percent of calves that they weaned for their number of cows, the low third was about 87, a little over 87%. The high third was almost 93%.
Yeah, so if you get 5% more calves,
5% more calves and lower feed cost, and the percent calves weaned could be death loss differences. It could be pregnancy differences. It could be they didn't get bred. I mean, there's lots of things it could be. But at the end of the day, you've got to have enough calves there to get weaned so you can sell them. And as Weber said, you manage your feed cost. But pretty dramatic difference between the high third. The return over variable cost was $197. The low third, their return was about negative $183. So about a $400 swing, a $380 swing. Am I reading that right, Dustin? And the middle third was close to zero.
Yep. And the idea with this is there are people out there that are making, significant money relative to, there are some that are losing a significant amount. And so trying to really show that a single number, an average, is useful, but that doesn't tell the whole story. You need to look at the entire distribution. Look at all the variability that goes into this.
One of the things to think about, and Bob mentioned it, managing that feed cost. One of the ways people do that is grazing crop residue at this time of year. So when we think about grazing crop residue, we still want to be able to monitor the cow body condition.
Yeah, I think, make sure you monitor, I think, not only the body condition score of the cows, but also the availability of that residue. So maybe doing some strip grazing, is one convenient way to make sure, you get really good use of the resource, but also makes it kind of easier to monitor kind of how much you've used, how much you've got left, instead of letting the cows kind of pick through the whole field. Make them clean up a section before you move them to the next one. That make a better use of the resource, but also kind of helps you do some inventory management too, so you know when to pull those cows off.
Because one of the challenges, if you don't do something like strip grazing, is as the winter goes along, the longer I leave them out there, what they're consuming, the quality is going down. And a lot of times, if these are spring calving cows, that's at the time when, because of weather stress and late pregnancy, their nutrient needs are actually going up. At the same time, what my field is supplying is going down. As people that are good at managing this really keep an eye on that, and they'll adjust either how long they leave the cattle on, use strip grazing, or the supplementation with protein, increasing that supplementation as the season progresses.
And back to our economics that we just looked at, and Dustin, just as you said, that feed cost is a big driver of profit differences. So if I can do this more economically, or at least do the math on what makes sense, is it crop residue grazing or feeding hay, that could make a difference in my bottom line.
Absolutely. And when you look at this year's a little different, but if you go back and take a look at past years, generally your top profit operations at top third have higher pasture costs per cow, but much lower non-pasture feed expenses. This year it's a little different, and the pasture costs are basically even. Yeah. But in the past, it's actually been quite reversed. It's been opposite, where the pasture costs are a lot higher for the top third compared to the bottom third, but the feed expenses is what was really driving it.
So we got a great listener question, and it ties right in as far as the nutrition and some of our discussion here goes. And the question is from a listener that his cows are a little bit thin. As he's feeding them this fall, he's feeding them some brome hay, some lick tubs, some mineral supplementation, and the cows are a body condition 4 out of 10. And they're not gaining weight on what's a pretty good ration, right? Brome hay, lick tub, mineral, he's feeding them, sounds like pretty well. So what would you want to look at? What do you want to do different in this scenario?
Look at that forage that they're supplementing of brome hay. And I typically think of brome hay as being a pretty good quality hay, pretty high in protein. That's not really protein deficit. But it does depend on, is it truly a brome hay or is it a mix, and when was it put up? And so it'd be nice to have a forage test on that to make sure that it is meeting my assumption that it's a pretty good quality. And then just quantity. Is this a situation when you can provide the hay free choice and there's plenty of it and they'll eat as much as they can? Or are we kind of short on hay, so maybe we're hand delivering it, decreasing the amount that they have available, and that's part of our challenge is how are we going to put weight on them? So make sure that it is a good quality hay that I thought it was. May have to give a little bit of additional supplementation, but those cows should start putting on weight as long as we don't have real weather stress. If, on the other hand, this is a poor quality forage, then we're definitely going to need to provide some supplementation, either some protein to get the protein content in the diet up, or if we're really short on hay and we're trying to stretch it, then we may use a low protein, high energy type of a supplement to just replace some of that forage and get their body condition up.
Yeah, and I'll echo your comment on both forage availability, right? So if you're free choice feeding hay, those cows ought to be consuming about 2% of their body weight in dry matter a day. So, for a 1,400 pound cow, that's 28 pounds per head per day of hay. And then, even if it's a adequate quality brome hay, they probably still need about a pound of crude protein supplementation to make really effective use of that forage. And so, lick tubs are really convenient, but they also end up being, I think, two problems. One is they're typically expensive in terms of unit protein cost. The other thing I don't like about lick tubs is it's hard to monitor individual animal consumption, right? So they're on average your consumption rate, and you should monitor consumption, obviously, to make sure you're getting close to targeted intakes. But there'll be some cows that eat zero of that lick tub, and there'll be some cows that eat double. So the nice thing about range cubes, if you feed them every other day, the cows get kind of hungry, and they'll clean up whatever cubes you put out, or distiller's grain, whatever supplement that you're using that's hand fed. And so you get a lot better consumption evenness across the cow herd when you hand feed them versus a lick tub or automated sort of feed intake.
From the K-State Beef Cattle Institute, Dustin Pendell, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Brad White. This from the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast. The full version can be found at ksubci.org. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Next up on Agriculture Today, a little something in the holiday spirit, thanks to the Kansas Forest Service here at Kansas State University. On the fresh new posting of the KFS podcast, we learn more about Christmas tree production in Kansas and what it takes to successfully operate a commercial Christmas tree farm, of which there are around 40 here in the state. Also, what those farms are doing to adjust to the present times. Kansas Forest Service Communications Coordinator Cassie Wandersee talks with 2 such tree farmers who happen to be leaders of the Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association, Phil Wegman and Amy Grelinger.
Phil, you're the president of the Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association and co-owner of Midland Holiday Pines with your wife, Junie. Mm-hmm. And Amy, you are the board member, one of the board members on the Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association, past president and second generation tree farmer on Windy Knoll Farms with your family. So what is it that got you guys interested in being a Christmas tree farmer in Kansas? And Phil, we can start with you.
We live in Shawnee. We live in Western Shawnee. And our neighbor right next to us, she was going to sell 7 acres. And at that time, it was just prairie ground. And the question was, what are we going to do with it? My wife had a cousin just down the road from us, and she grew Christmas trees. And she said, oh, you ought to plant a few Christmas trees. So we really started knowing almost nothing about growing a Christmas tree. She suggested a few varieties we might plant, and that's what we did. And there were numerous mistakes I made that I wish I had known more about it at the time we started. But that's how we got started. And then, of course, we joined the Christmas Tree Association and really started networking and learning about what you should be doing, how you should be running the farm. And everything's taken off from there. It was a very humble, very, very, very humble beginning. Almost no customers at all. And then we first started selling. I mean, we were lucky to get one or two people out the place. We didn't have that many trees to sell, but it was a very humble beginning. So it's been a joy to see how it's taken off. I should tell you too, one other thing, my wife and I are both from farm backgrounds, so it was a pretty natural, enjoying growing things was just always part of what we like doing. So it's something we like. We enjoy growing trees. There are times when you'd like to say, I wish it wasn't so busy and we could sit back and enjoy this place a little bit more, but we enjoy what we're doing. That's why we're doing it.
And how about you, Amy?
Well, I'm lucky. I've got a hardworking father-in-law who started this farm back, and we planted our first tree in the 80s. And trees take 8 years to grow, like Phil said. So you kind of start in a garage, or you start with this way or that way. And so I'm very fortunate to be a second-generation farmer to an established tree farm. The surprising fact, Cassie, is there's about 35 to 40 hidden Christmas tree farms in Kansas that are a part of the KCTGA. Now, there are several other farms that aren't a part of the KCTGA, and we are located between Derby, Andover, and Rose Hill down in the Wichita area. And we have 4 farms right in this area, but it's amazing how many people will go, oh, we never even knew you were here. And so it's a fun adventure. And I'll tell you a little secret just between us 3. Okay, don't tell anybody else. But right. Christmas trees don't grow in a triangle shape. You have to trim and cut every single tree on the property. Some people just think they grow that way. They don't. So don't tell anybody else. Okay, it's our little secret today.
Wow. So that's a lot of work. So you have to take care of these trees for 8 years, shape them that entire time. That's a long turnaround. That's, like we visited before we started recording, Phil, both coming from farm and ranch backgrounds. It's not like raising wheat where you plant and then you harvest it within a year. 8 years is a long time to turn around on that. So what was that startup process like for you, especially Phil and Amy, as you're getting into it, like waiting 8 years to cut your first Christmas tree?
For the first few years, we had planted the trees, and we started mowing. We planted the trees, we mowed, and then they'd die, and you'd replant because every year, due to the weather, because we don't have irrigation or anything like that, we would lose a number of trees, replant, continue to mow, and finally get a little bit larger. Then we realized, we got to learn how to shear and how to do that. Because we could see they weren't growing in the regular triangular shape that most people assume a tree grows in. So we got into shearing, and then we planted more trees, and then the process continued. So I don't know. I would say you plant, you start small, you learn as you go. And one thing I would say to anybody going into the business, it's an awful lot of hard work. You're mowing all the time. Oh, the other thing is you're spraying because you have to worry about diseases and bugs and scale and all kinds of things that attack your trees. So it's a very labor-intensive business.
I don't know about Phil, but we plant every March to May is your goal. We plant about 1,500 babies. We're lucky. We irrigate around here. It's one thing Bob has done, the owner. He's made sure we've had irrigation. And a lot of our tree farmers around Kansas do not have irrigation. So of that 1,500, you'll probably lose, I don't know, Phil, what would you say, in the 40, sometimes 50% rate based on drought in Kansas?
Yep. Sometimes you lose that many and you're replanting and say, oh my goodness.
Yeah. I think the hardest part is you lose the babies, which you take into account you're going to lose some of the babies. But I think the hardest thing is just recently we've had to cut down some 8, 9, and 10-foot trees based on disease. And this thing you mentioned called scale is thanks to the Kansas Forestry Service. Big shout out to Dave Bruton and his people and K-State, because without them, scale is one of our deadliest killers. And we fight that on a regular basis here.
So yeah, to circle back around to our listeners, in case you forgot, we're in the middle of, worldwide pandemic here with COVID-19. But the Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association and their members on the board have really spent a lot of time prepping for Christmas season. working on guidelines and suggestions on how Christmas tree farms that allow the public to come in can really put some precautions and ensure the safety of their staff and the public coming in. So that's a little bit of what Phil and Amy have been working on and helping their members figure out, or what are those precautions? And I'm like Phil, I grew up farming and ranching, so our Christmas tree was red cedar out of the pasture. And if you cut one, you cut 20. So it worked really well for that. But what are some of those guidelines that you guys have been recommending for your members to implement there on their farms?
Well, I think the first thing we've all worked on is just developing a plan and then communicating that plan to our customers, to our employees. We're going to have to obviously train employees. And under communication, we've talked about redoing our webpage, getting signage up, mailings we have out to customers, and of course, social media. We've tried again, get the word out about what we're doing differently, and then training employees. I know we're going to take temperatures of all the employees as they come, and if they're not feeling well, obviously not coming, reporting to work. The challenge here is keeping safe yourself, keeping your employees safe, and also your customers, and hopefully communicating to our customers. We're going to do everything we possibly can to keep them safe and ensure they have a successful experience coming to our tree farms. What about you, Amy?
About the same thing. Each county is a little bit unique and different. So I think we're going to find our farms across Kansas are doing things a little bit differently. One of our farms lives in a county I looked up last night. They have less than 32 cases. So they're going to take different precautions than someone like me in Sedgwick County is going to take. The other thing that's unique, and Phil can attest to this, is a lot of our Christmas tree growers are over 60 years of age. So we have to take into account our population as the KCTGA. Our farmers are all older, and statistically speaking, they're in that risk category.
So where can people go to find a list, or where could they find that information on a Christmas tree farm that would be closest to them?
Well,
we have a tree locator on our KCTGA website. It's the state of Kansas, and you just click on it and it'll tell you exactly where to go near your hometown.
Awesome. And what's the name of the website for the Christmas Tree Growers Association?
Just Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association.com.
Or, we could Google it. I feel like most people just Google things.
Or you can Google Christmas tree farms and it'll pop up too. Yeah.
So if you could give any piece of advice to somebody that might be listening to this podcast that wants to become a Christmas tree farmer, what would that be?
We have a wonderful guidebook that's written about beginning a Christmas tree farm. I always suggest read as much as you can about it first. Talk to people in the business and become as knowledgeable as you can before you get into it.
Well, and joining our organization, we set people up with mentors. So we do set people up with them because you take a risk in this business. You risk them not growing, the bugs, the mowing. It's so fun though. The joy of seeing our customers for the 2 to 6 weeks we're open is unsurpassed.
Along with the Kansas Forest Service's Cassie Wandersee, Phil Wegman, and Amy Grelinger of the Kansas Christmas Tree Growers Association. To access that locator map Amy spoke of to find the Christmas tree farm nearest you, go to kctga.com. Again, kctga.com. And to hear this podcast in full, go to kansasforests.org. This is Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and let's check on today's lead stories on the agricultural news page now. These courtesy in part of DTN. A bipartisan group of lawmakers in Congress announced yesterday a proposed coronavirus aid package costing $908 billion overall. It would include $26 billion for agriculture and nutrition. This proposal is less than half the cost of an aid package proposed by the White House before the election, and roughly one-third the cost of plans backed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The package, though, is considered a short-term plan, as President-elect Joe Biden announced his economic team yesterday and hinted that that team would propose a larger economic stimulus package once in office. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley told reporters yesterday that Congress is working on an aid package, but the costs had to be lower than the earlier proposals for any package, he said, to clear the Senate. He said that some lawmakers are still holding out for a larger package, more than $2 trillion, which Grassley said is unreasonable and includes provisions that do not have bipartisan agreement. Now, on agricultural aid, Grassley indicated direct aid for producers could be less than the $20 billion initially in the U.S. Senate bill earlier this fall. The senator said agricultural aid would need to be tied to nutrition aid to garner the bipartisan support needed. Farmers have collected a total of $21.5 billion in aid under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Programs 1 and 2, and the USDA has also spent $4.1 billion on the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, which the USDA states has invoiced more than 123 million food aid boxes to be distributed to food banks and institutions around the country. By the way, payments under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2 have now totaled $11.1 billion as of this past Sunday. Acreage-based payments totaling $5.5 billion, accounting for 49% of the payments made. Livestock payments at $3 billion. Sales commodities at $1.6 billion. Dairy at $1.1 billion. And eggs and broilers at $44 million. Payments for 5 commodities totaling $1 billion or more. Corn, cattle, sales commodities, and soybeans among them. Iowa still leads all states in payments at $1 billion. The rest of the top 5 states being Nebraska, California, Minnesota, and Illinois, each of those with more than $700 million in payments. And to remind, the sign-up for CFAP 2 runs through a week from Friday, December the 11th. What are some indicators that those following the agricultural economic sector should watch out for regarding next year's economic outlook? Here's an opinion on that, as reported by the USDA's Rod Bain.
While there's still some areas of concern in the ag economic sector, Nathan Kaufman of the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City and others agree.
This outlook has been far improved from 6 months ago.
Yet, will this momentum continue going into 2021? Kaufman says some indicators to watch out for include how strong commodity prices are versus input costs.
Cash flow going into 2021, as we go through loan renewal season, there are likely to still be some challenging conversations about profitability and what that looks like in 2021.
Commodity prices will also factor into outlooks regarding exports and potential government supports and payments available to producers in 2021.
Depending on the path of commodity prices, the outlook for some of those government payments will be important in terms of determining the viability of a number of ag operations in 2021.
As Kaufman adds, economic challenges that face the ag sector pre-pandemic and over the last few years could still factor into next year. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
In other headlines today, Growth Energy is planning to file a lawsuit against the EPA for missing the November 30th statutory deadline to finalize the 2021 renewable fuel standard volumes. In a letter to EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler yesterday, Growth Energy General Counsel Joseph Kakich said the agency has 60 days to finalize the rule before a legal challenge is brought. Effectively, the 60-day deadline means that Wheeler can choose not to finalize revise volume standards for 21, turning that decision over to the first few days of President-elect Biden's administration. Biden has yet to announce a nominee to head the EPA in his administration. Back on Monday, Renewable Fuels Association President and Chief Executive Officer Jeff Cooper suggested the Trump administration wait for a Biden administration to finalize the rule early in 21. In recent months, Wheeler indicated the agency had more data points to consider in setting those 2021 volumes, including falling fuel demand this year as a result of the COVID economic situation. Growth Energy CEO Emily Score said in a statement that the RFS volumes are important for ethanol producers who have faced a challenging year. The sign-up period for the 2021 dairy margin coverage is closing soon. The USDA's Stephanie Ho has more on that.
The 2018 Farm Bill authorized a dairy risk management tool called the Dairy Margin Coverage Program.
It's a good risk management tool. We encourage all producers to look seriously at it for 2021. Sign-up ends on December 11th.
USDA Undersecretary Bill Northeast says participants did receive payments the first year of the program in 2019.
2020 saw a big payout for producers that had dairy margin coverage, especially as dairy prices dropped significantly back in April, May, and June. And that was a very important time. So all producers that signed up in 2020 got helped by the program.
The voluntary program offers protection to dairy producers.
In this crazy time that we're in, coronavirus and any other kinds of things that can impact their margins can really cause some producers to be able to sleep at night with dairy margin coverage for 2021.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And lastly here, the Flying W Ranch, owned and operated by Josh and Gwen Hoy of Cedar Point in Chase County, has been selected as the recipient of the 2020 Kansas Leopold Conservation Award. Presented last week during the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Convention, the $10,000 award recognizes landowner achievement in the field of voluntary conservation. The Hoys are known for their innovative conservation practices. After removing miles of fence within their ranch, they adopted an instinctive migratory grazing method for their livestock. They also control woody and invasive species by patch burning and mechanical removal. This award was presented by the Sand County Foundation, the American Farmland Trust, the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, and the Ranchland Trust of Kansas. Congratulations to the Flying W Ranch and the Hoys. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
The coyote was dead.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
As I passed, he lifted the coyote by its hind legs and tossed it in the back of the pickup truck. The coyote was dead, but still limp as the body swayed. It was a beautiful beast with thick coat. It must have been a male. It had a dark stripe along its back and reminded me of the German shepherds we have had. Gorgeous dogs. But I fully appreciated the fact that no German shepherds are allowed to enter Australia. The fear that if it crossed with the Australian wild dog, the dingo, a super sheep killer could be produced. The funny thing is, the German Shepherd is a herding dog, and it is good at it. Some of mine were, but I never trained them that way. I always made sure that when we had a litter, the male was as friendly and gentle as our dogs were. I slowed down as I passed the hunters. I waved. It was still morning. The sun was warming up, and over the yellow corn stubble field, hundreds of crows had gathered. They rose, flew a few beats, and settled down again. It looked like a Black Friday shopping spree at the mall. I rolled my window down, and as I slowly drove on, I listened to the ruckus the crows made. There must have been some picking left on the harvested cornfield. I wondered if the crows by chance roost in trees on our farm. They're welcome. It will be interesting to watch and to listen to them settling down. In the evening, noisy, and then finally silent. But once in a while, a crow sound. As I drove on to the farm, I saw a few turkeys. One flock was close to the road. They survived Thanksgiving. Good for them. They, too, were scratching and picking fallen corn. I don't think they remembered hunting pressure as they casually moved about. The clean cornfields stand out clearly in the valleys against the trees along the creeks and the brown hills. I enjoy this time of the year. There is no hurry anymore, and the fact that the weather has been good, warm, and open makes checking things so much easier. I drove out to the farm to check the wire gates. They needed some attention, as all gates seem to need from time to time. Wires stretch. The fence posts are hit with bucket or the tractor or whatever. I had driven out to see what I needed to do. The post to hold up the wire gate had been broken and the wires had snapped. Must have been hooked on something. Next year I plan to open the gate myself and really pull it all the way open and not lay it down partly before they come to cut the hay. Of course, over time, everything wears out. Even I do. I have noticed. Back at home, I already had set aside 5-foot-tall light, straight Osage orange posts to use as replacements in the gate. As I counted the down post, I knew I had enough. I looked at the north gate. It was still in good order. The no hunting sign was down. I picked it up and replaced it at the gate. I know someone had entered there to make a short film clip near the old stone foundation of the burned-down farmhouse. It must have been very quiet to live there on the dead-end road. Many years ago, that is, Kansas time. I think there was a road going past this old house to another house further on the hills. If you look and try to read the land, you can follow a road. There's a section on which I nearly did, thank goodness we did not, try to land an airplane my friend was piloting over the farm for an aerial view. There were no drones then. We had noticed while banking what looked like a clean grass strip. We circled it, but flew on. Later I went to look when I walked the farm. What we thought was a grass strip was an old section road going up and down. It had looked flat from the air, no shadows. Each time I am in that corner of the farm, I think of it. Had we tried to set down, the small plane would have flipped. As I drove home on Route 13, I noticed the dead buck beside the road. It was a buck, as I saw the antlers. I assume its progeny will walk the hills. I wonder if anyone stopped and collected the wreck. I also wonder what happened to the vehicle which struck it. I hope it had a cattle guard. It would have helped. The truck, that is. This past weekend, Guido, my oldest son, came by. He and his wife were going to collect flat stones on the farm to use as an extension to their deck and patio. I asked him to bring his battery drill to quickly drill the holes in the poles for the gate at the site. When they went for the stone, I started to sort wires and posts at the gate. To load their stones did not take long, and on their way back, Guido stopped to help me as Emily drove on. The two of us worked well together, and the gate was quickly repaired with new posts standing straight. It's again a cared-for entrance. It's not a fancy gate, it's a wire gate. They work, if you keep them up. On the way back home, we passed the dead buck. Someone had rolled it over. I surely hope they did not take the head with the rack to mount it.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That wraps up our Wednesday edition. Thanks for tuning in. Please be back with us right here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.